Hi there, today's book is The Family Remains by Lisa Jewell. I do want to let you know that this is a follow-up to a prior book of hers called The Family Upstairs. This book was published in 2019, and then The Family Remains is a follow-up to that, which was published in 2022. Now, I don't think you necessarily have to read the first one for you to find this story interesting or to follow the story. But it would be a good idea to read that one first, just because it went in depth to as far as how what happened to the family. And she does mention, briefly certain things to tie the story together to give you an idea of the past. So she does give some details of that, but it probably would be a good idea to read that one first. So anyway, at the start of this book, we meet Jason Mott. He's a mudlarking guide. I don't know what that is. Seems like some kind of hobbyist thing. And anyway, while he was on this mudlarking tour, he's a tour guide for this thing, and somebody found a bag of bones. And so, of course, the police was called in, and so they on this investigation to determine who the bones belonged to. And so, while doing their investigation, they were able to figure out who the person is, and it turned out this person was Bertie Dunlap Evers. And she used to be in a band and was an up-and-coming band that was fairly popular around that time. However, she disappeared, and the parents didn't really report her missing. It seemed like they weren't on the best of terms, and so years and years and years had gone by. However, it seemed that one of the siblings were on their deathbed, and so had requested to talk to her, and they couldn't find her, so they had reported her missing. But of course, nobody ever, found her. So a little bit of the backstory with Bertie is that Bertie had, while she was in the band, they had filmed a music video at this mansion, I guess you want to call it, on Cheney Walk. And that house had belonged to Martine and Henry Lamb. Now, they were fairly well off, and they had two children. Yeah, at the time that Bertie moved in, they had two children, which was Henry Jr. and Lucy Lamb. So this prior book will go into that. And so this is how these stories will tie together, because when Bertie was there, she brought in a guy named David Thompson. I think she was the one who brought him in, but he was supposed to be some kind of herbalist, spiritualist, and so he was brought in to advise Henry and Martine, who were the owner of the home. And then at some point, he brought his family in and just moved in and took over. So he brought in his wife, Sally, and then he had two children, Phineas, and then his daughter was Clemency. So while they were there, pretty much between him and Bertie had taken control of the household, and ultimately the parents were found dead along with David, and then Bertie, they never found her, but they had come to find out now that these bag of bones belonged to Bertie. So now they're on the police are now investigating to figure out what happened and who was responsible for her death. So we meet now Phineas. Phineas is currently Henry Lamb, who is the son who's going by Phineas's name. And then also Lucy Lamb is still alive, but she's going by the name Marie Caron. And she has two children now, Stella and Marco. So after years, she was living abroad, and now she's in the same apartment with Henry. So Henry is living together with Lucy under her assumed name, and then the two children. And all the accounts, they were doing okay. Now, how do I make this not confusing? I'm going to refer to Lucy just by her original name, now that I've mentioned what her pseudonym is. So Lucy had a third child, which was her first one from when she lived at Cheney Walk, that she had just reunited with a few years prior, and her name is Libby. Now, she's a grown child now, so she's in her early 20s, and they had reunited when a trust that the parents had originally set up, she would have come of age to be able to inherit under that trust. And so that's how they all ended up meeting back together. So we have Libby, who's the daughter of Lucy, and then we have Lucy, and then we have Henry. Okay, so Lucy has been wanting to meet her dad, and her dad is Phineas, the real Phineas. And Phineas had been abroad in Tanzania. Was it Tanzania? Somewhere in Africa, and he was a tour guide. So Libby is now in a relationship with a reporter, investigative reporter, and so he had been helping her track him down. So they were all set to go find Phineas. Shortly before they were supposed to take their trip, he had left. And so Henry's trying to figure out where he is because he has unfinished business with Phineas as well. So they had discovered that he went in talking to somebody. He had read some reviews and called up he found information, got in touch with one of the persons who had mentioned some information of interest to him in the review, and then he had determined that he'd gone to Chicago. So Henry took it upon himself to go to Chicago to look for Phineas. So while Lucy and Libby are still back home now, the police is coming around now asking questions because now they've determined that where the body was before, because that body had been at the house for years and years, and somebody had recently moved it. And so that's how they ended up discovering the bag of bones, was because it was recently moved. Now, the original house that was inherited had been sold, and that was what had triggered the person to move the body. Now, we meet also Rachel. Here's another Rachel. She met this guy while she was in New York, and his name was Michael. And funny enough, Rachel is from London. I think she was from London. Somewhere in the UK. I believe it was London. And coincidentally, Michael said he has a place in London, and he lived there from most of the year, but he was back in the States. So he had asked her out, and then when she got back, he had reached back out. No, he didn't ask her out right away, but after he got back, he had messaged her because she's a jeweler and she had a website, so he looked her up that way and had reached out to her to ask her out when he was back in England. So anyway, she decided to go out with him, and things moved really fast. He seemed like the perfect guy. He projected himself to be a wealthy guy, a wealthy businessman. He adored her, pretty much love bombing, and rushed her into a marriage. Geez, it seemed like the minute she got married, this guy changed. The first day of the honeymoon, red flags everywhere. He was just such a jerk, very mean, and complete change compared to how he was before. So he would be verbally abusive, and so she was pretty much in denial for a while until, something happened that led her to decide, you know what, I'm gonna divorce him. So as she went to the attorney for advice, they said that, they asked the questions and whether there was abuse and all that to be able to determine which way to go with the divorce proceedings. And she didn't report the abuse, so her option was to wait, lay low for 2 years, and then divorce. And so that's what she chose to do because she didn't want to detail some horrendous things that he had done to her. Now, this guy is really, really conniving, and he was just a jerk. He comes off like a nice guy in public and just awful. So anyway, Rachel now has a connection with Lucy because, as it turns out, Lucy has a connection to her husband, Michael. And ultimately, at some point during the book, they meet and they discover certain things that happened to each other. They kind of bonded over that. And later on, Michael was found dead, and so there's a police investigation into his death. Now, Michael had, Rachel's dad was, it seemed, being blackmailed. Rachel had stumbled upon his bank statements, And so he was fairly well off, but she had noticed some significant transfers. They were huge, over $100,000 each, and she was wondering what was going on. So she was like, you know, she's going to call the bank, and he was all, he didn't want her to do that. And ultimately, he had let her know what had happened. And so he was being blackmailed by someone who was threatening to release compromising pictures and videos of her. So he ended up paying a total of like $650,000 to a blackmailer. And Rachel was determined now to find out who it was, and she wanted her dad to get her money back. And so there was that storyline within the book to determine who was blackmailing Rachel's dad. Now, there's still the investigation going on regarding Birdie, and that ties into their past at the Cheney Walk house. And so that investigation ended up, going back into the story of the past and their life at the Cheney Walk house and what led to Birdie being deceased. So the real killer of Birdie's real killer actually was not caught, because there was somebody who had lived at the house for a while who ultimately had committed suicide shortly after he was discovered and questioned, and he claimed responsibility for the death to save the real killer, who was a child at the time that Birdie was killed. So I hope you're able to keep track of this because of the name changes, but there was a lot that had happened in this book, and going from the UK to the US, and to be able to track Finn down, and the investigation with the police, and how that all tied into the characters who were going by different names, and then of course the connection between Lucy and Rachel and Michael. So I don't want to give too much away, and hopefully that wasn't too confusing for you, but definitely this is a good one from Lisa Jewell. 4 stars for sure. If you have read or listened to this book, let me know your thoughts. Until next time.